Okay. So thank you, everybody. Alawa Pa. This is Thursday night, 9th of March, and our guest speaker tonight is Gregory Dahl, and he's going to share with us a world tour he did in 1972, way before the Institute process, when the Baha'i world looked very different, and he traveled with a camera and a guitar, and he's going to share with us all of his experiences from so many, what, more than 50 countries, right? It was 54 countries or something.
46 on
What
that
was
trip.
it?
46 on that trip.
46. Okay, 46. Okay. And with that, I think I'll just turn it over. Greg Dahl has worked at the IMF in Washington, D.C., and he has had the ability to work in many different communities and many different capacities. He served on the National Assembly in Bulgaria. He's currently serving on the National Spiritual Assembly in the Czech Republic. And without further ado, I introduced you, Greg Dahl, and I spotlight Greg. Okay.
Thank you, Jennifer. It's lovely to see so many people here. Many of you are friends from the past. Happy to see you in just a little tiny picture. I want to share with you some, just not all my memories, too many to share. You'd be very bored, but a few stories from a trip I took in 1972-73. And I think that it will help us appreciate how much the faith has changed in only 50 years. 50 years may seem a long time in a lifetime, but it's nothing in the history of religion. And the way the faith has changed is really remarkable. So I'm going to take us back for 50 years. And if you know some of the places that I visited, you'll see they're very different today than they were at that time. Before I get into the stories, though, I want to give some background, which may be familiar to some of you, but probably not most of you, about why I took that trip and how I was able to take it. I was graduating from high school in 1965, and there were quite a few young people either entering the faith or in Baha'i families in the United States. And they had already had one summer youth project service project for youth. And my parents suggested that I could go on the second one, the year I was graduating from high school. So I jumped at the opportunity, and it was a life-changing experience for me. That's a different story, but it was very important. And then the next summer, somebody on the National Assembly had the idea that it would be good to share some of our experience in America with the youth in Europe. So it was arranged for my brother Roger and I to go on what the National Assembly in America called an International Youth Project, although it really wasn't. But anyway, they gave us a number of photographs to share with the friends of things that were being done in America. And we went and visited Lois Lawrence, the Knight of Baha'u'llah in the Lofoten Islands, way up above the Arctic Circle, and then came down through Sweden and went to the Danish summer school. And then the following summer, I arranged with another American youth to go to South America to visit Bolivia. And that again was a life-changing experience for me, another story. But I was writing reports and sent them to the institutions of what I saw in the state of the Baha'i community and so on. Bolivia was one of the first places to have mass enrollment among the Quichua people in the very remote areas, where you had to walk long distances up and down mountains to get there. Anyway, I got a wonderful letter from the Hand of the Cause, Jalal Khaze, who was living in Brazil and couldn't visit the altitudes in Bolivia. He was very appreciative of my reports. So I really wanted to do more of that, but then the Vietnam War intervened, and those of us who were of age to be drafted into the army were not allowed to leave the United States. So I was involved in some other things. I produced a record album. It was the first record album of Baha'i singing their own songs. The second one ever, I think, because the first one was Russ Garcia's chorus that he was conducting in Los Angeles. I was very involved in music. That's an important thing to mention, because at that time, a lot of us youth were very enthusiastic about music. We were writing songs, we were singing, we were enlivening meetings, especially songs that people could sing along with. So it was a group activity, and there was a lot of spirit. And we had big youth conferences. And anyway, And then my first year of graduate study, I finished, and I got drafted. And the 2 days before, it's another story. Sorry, I'm not telling all the stories tonight, but 2 days before I was supposed to go into the Army, I got a commission in the US Public Health Service and found myself in Raleigh, North Carolina, in an office job for 2 years, working in air pollution control. But I was feeling the need to get out. I'd done 1 year of graduate study. I thought, okay, I've already interrupted my graduate work. I'm 2 years during my service. I'll take another year and I'll do some traveling finally, and I'll, really do it upright. So then I learned that there was a possibility of getting a long distance round the world air ticket. The cheapest one was Los Angeles, Bangkok, Bangkok, Los Angeles, 2 tickets actually. And there was an agreement among all the members of the IATA, the International Air Transport Authority, that you could have 1 ticket and you could stop any number of times as long as you didn't exceed a certain mileage. So I went and got the big book of all the mileages and spent a lot of time figuring out all the places I could go to on the cheapest possible ticket going around the world. And it was quite complicated actually across the South Pacific, but I managed to work it all out. The first airline I went to refused to write such a long ticket, and then Air France agreed, but I had to fly in Air France first flight. So my first flight was to Tahiti. Anyway, I had a lot of time to prepare, and I had to take my guitar, of course. I had to take 2 Nichromat cameras, one for black and white film, which was more reliable and cheaper, and one for color. The International Bahá'í Audiovisual Center gave me a little projector to test that could be run off of a battery to share pictures of what people were doing in different parts of the world. And basically, I didn't have much space for anything else, so I was weighing everything very carefully. I discovered, a little Sony, that's important, a little Sony cassette recorder that I could use to record music. And I discovered that even plastic bags can be pretty heavy when you're worrying about every ounce. So I tried to pack enough to cover the tropics, because I was going across the South Pacific and also winter in Japan. But I didn't have much space for many clothes, so I took the bare minimum. And of course, this was way before internet, cell phones, any of those things. We had letters and we had cables, telegrams. So I wrote letters to all of the national assemblies in the countries where I was planning to visit, explaining my trip, the purpose of my trip. House of Justice had asked me to take pictures of all the Baha'i properties, so that was on the list. And I got a few replies, but mostly I didn't hear anything back, and I had no idea who would meet me, what they would be like, what my experience would be. I was just trusting in Baha'u'llah. I've written ahead when I'm going to arrive. Hopefully somebody will be there, and I'll see what happens. And actually, there are only 3 countries out of 46 that I had planned to visit where I wasn't met at the airport. 2 of them were in Africa, and one I'll tell you about towards the end of this talk. It's an interesting story. I was told that, especially going to Tahiti and other places in the Pacific, if I wasn't met by somebody, the thing to do was to go to the radio station, and they would make an announcement that so-and-so was looking for so-and-so, and that's the way you were able to connect in these small places. So anyway, my first stop was Tahiti. It was a very long flight from Los Angeles. If you turn the globe in a certain way, it looks like the whole globe is the Pacific. The Pacific Ocean is actually almost half the surface of the globe, and the distances are enormous. But I want to start sharing my pictures, so let me see if I can do this properly here. Just give me a minute. So do you see Teripae in Tahiti? I guess you're all muted, so you can't tell me, but I hope you are. Okay.
Yes, we can.
We see.
Yes.
We see it.
They met me at the airport, and it was evening, so I went to bed. I got up in the morning. It was hot there, so I put on my shorts and my sandals and a light shirt and went down, and there was sitting waiting for me with just shorts on. And I sat down next to him and we started to talk. And then I felt some company and I realized that I was fresh meat for the mosquitoes. They were chewing my toes. So I went running upstairs and put on my long pants and socks and shoes and a long sleeve shirt. Anyway, all of my careful planning, because I didn't have good advice from anybody, so it was all right. Anyway, they wanted me to take a flight across the river to the island of Moorea. Tahiti was and is a French territory, so these were French people who were pioneers in Moorea, the sailhawks, this fantastically beautiful part of the world. But I'm not sure they even had electricity. I think maybe not. They obviously had running water because there's some running in front of their wonderful little house there. And these amazing views of the ocean and the palm trees. But a very tiny community. There was a young man, I think he was Chinese, who was working on cars there, and that was it. This is also Moorea. Now we're going to skip over, I have to skip most of the countries. I'll just tell you countries where I have a kind of a story to tell. I stopped in Samoa and Tonga and Fiji. And then in order to get up towards to Japan, I had to go through the Gilbert and Ellice Islands and Nauru and up that way to Japan. And the stop I wanted to talk about is the island of Funafuti, which is now called Tuvalu. The experience is something traveling in the South Pacific. This is an atoll, which, as you may know, is just usually a coral reef that makes a big circle. There's a lagoon in the middle. I think they may be the top of an old volcano. I'm not sure, but very low elevation. And there had been a hurricane that sent waves across the island, and there was a lot of damage. And I was told, leaving Fiji, that I might not be allowed to get off the plane, that nobody in principle was being allowed into the island because they were in a state of emergency. So I thought, we'll see. I had a letter with the names of 2 people there, and I arrived and got off the plane, and I asked the name of the first person, and they said, oh, she's left, she's not here. And I said, well, what about Dr. Tilinga? And they said, oh, Dr. Tilinga, he's right here, he's putting a patient on the plane. So I was welcomed immediately by the doctor in the island. The other person who was getting off the plane was a colonel in Her Majesty's Army from this was a colony at that time, so this was the British colony, had sent a high-ranking officer to survey the damage and see what needed to be done. Now, he was getting off the plane too, but they weren't expecting him. So as I went off, this is Dr. Tilinga here, as I went off on his motorcycle carrying my guitar and my suitcase, I looked back and here's the colonel of the British Army waiting in the sun for somebody to take care of him. For me, this was an amazing lesson of how the Baha'i community, even then, so informal with just people ordinary people who were elected to institutions, was functioning better than the British Commonwealth, than the British Empire at that time, with all of its resources. Really very interesting. And that I was, just by sending letters, that I was met in all the countries, given hospitality, welcomed, people of all different kinds. Just, it was such an experience, such a miracle. Now we travel more easily, we are exposed to more countries and cultures, we take these things for granted. But it really was quite amazing. So anyway, he took me to his house, which is shown here. I learned that you can take a very effective shower with 1 liter of water. Water was very precious there. And if you're careful, you could take your shower with 1 liter. This is an example of the destruction that they were dealing with. His house was spared, but there was a lot of this. There was a young man who took me for a walk around part of the atoll. And we'd been out in the hot sun quite a while, and he asked me if I was thirsty. And I didn't know why he was asking. We didn't bring anything with us. And I said, well, yeah, I'm thirsty. So he climbed up one of these palm trees without any rope or anything, knocked down what is it? A coconut, sorry, a coconut, opened it with his teeth. I don't know if you've ever, coconuts has all this fibrous, hard thing around the shell on the inside. He tore it open with his teeth, used a bit of that to push through one of the little eyes in the top and gave it to me to drink. If you've seen people climbing palm trees, usually they tie their feet together. They have another rope maybe so they can go up. And anyway, they have a machete to knock the coconuts down, but he didn't have anything. He gave me the local Coca-Cola or whatever from the palm tree. It's quite an experience. So here's Dr. Talinga with his family. In 2013, I had finished scanning my pictures and had put them on a website, which is what I'm sharing with you now. And I wrote to the national assemblies of all those countries and told them that there were pictures that I'd taken on that trip that might interest them. And I got a letter back from somebody named Peniva, who said, that was me in that picture there. I was 6. He had become the secretary of the National Spiritual Assembly of Tuvalu, and he was very happy to see the picture and asked me to send him all the pictures I had taken on my stay on his island. Now we're going to go to Tarawa, which was the capital of the Gilbert and Ellice Islands at that time. So the north is now called Kiribati. And the capital is Bikini-Bayu, so this is where the National Bahá'í Center was. This was I think he must have been the secretary, I don't remember. Everything is from memory here because I don't have my notes with me, so I may make some mistakes. But this was Masipe and his family at the Hazira, and this is his darling children. Lovely people. And this is the caretaker of the Maniaba, which was the meeting place, the Bahá'í meeting place, and his family. And this is where that caretaker lived with his wife and family. This was typical traditional home in the South Pacific with open sides. They had some things they could roll down if they wanted privacy, but mostly they wanted the breeze and to keep cool, and their belongings around, very informal. Now, I want to share with you just a few recordings during this presentation. I'm going to share with you a song from Tarawa, and I'll show a few more pictures of Tarawa while I'm playing the song. Such amazing natural beauty in that part of the world, really something. Now we're going to skip Nauru. We're going to go to Ponape, part of the Micronesia, where a dear friend of my mother's, Virginia Breeks, had gone as a pioneer. I actually have pictures of them saying goodbye to her in San Francisco. She had built this house for herself, long-time pioneer there. And this was the young man, Sus, who was going to be my guide to go and visit the village of Nan-U. We had to walk around the island. Ponape, as you can see, is a mountainous island, but around it is an atoll of coral reef. It was very scenic. We were walking on a road around to this village, spent the night there, had a meeting with the friends. You can see a bit of the reef in the distance, which is why the sea is so calm by the coast. Beautiful scenery. And as we were walking back along the seashore, I heard a boy singing down below in on the beach by the sea. And he was singing, "Shine your light on me, Baha'u'llah. I am over here, Baha'u'llah. Shine your light on me, Baha'u'llah. Glory, glory. Anyway, I was very touched. I didn't actually see him. I just heard his singing coming up from the seashore. And this is the famous picture that you've seen, which is also in the recent film about 100 years of the Baha'i community. This is me with Zeus and my precious guitar and the little portable projector they had given me. And in my other bag there were my 2 cameras and my drip dry clothes, making my way around the island. Unfortunately, I heard not too long, well, a few years later, that Zeus had passed away. I don't know how. Another thing I wanted to show you, I'm not sure you can see, but this was by the side of the road. There's a bamboo thing here where the water would come down for travelers to have some fresh water to drink. I thought that was really nice. So now we're going to skip over Japan and go to South Korea. Here, they took me to a teaching institute, which was being held in a grammar school. So, of course, you have the kids there, too, naturally. And the adults were listening to the talk. Now, this young woman in the front with the purple jacket and the purse was Hanju Kim, who married the next American who came through, Kim, Bob Farley, who was studying medicine. And just a little story. Years later, we were on pilgrimage, the family and I, with Hanju and her husband. And we happened to be in the visitor center, which is for ordinary, the public to visit. There's a little visitor center with exhibits in Haifa. And on the wall in one of the exhibits, they had a black and white version of this picture. So here we were together seeing the picture that I had taken so many years before in South Korea. Hanju was asked to be the Baha'i representative at the big conference on the environment in Rio in 1992. She was the spokesman for the Baha'i international community. Now she's living, I think, in California. So they took us to a village to go teaching. This was now in the winter. It was cold and wet. We were walking down the road. Actually, we'd come in a car, and you'll see it in a minute. This is Hanju with her city clothes and her nice shoes getting all muddy. And there were fields all around. Oh dear, sometimes I click in the wrong place and that happens. All right, here. Okay. Here you can see the car and how muddy it got. I'll come back to that. And they had a pamphlet they were showing to people. And here were the kids, the marvelous kids. And I wanted to explain to you in the back here, you see this is a home. There are no windows, there's just a door with rice paper. So that's where you come in and go out, and there's some light that comes through the rice paper. So we were going to have a meeting in one of the homes, and it was crowded with all the adults. It was very full, so the children couldn't get in. And by the way, they heated the homes there by putting a charcoal briquette in a place under the floor. The floor was covered with linoleum, so it would heat the house, radiant heating from the floor. But I was the guest of honor, so of course they asked me to sit right over the fire. Everybody was sitting on the floor. I was literally in the hot seat. It was quite funny, but anyway. And then I heard there was a lot of giggling and carrying on outside the door. And then I saw some fingers poking through the rice paper and eyes appearing in the door. It was the children who were dying of curiosity to know what was happening inside. And they wanted to get a peek. Such marvelous kids. This is another picture of the village. So the guy with the car decided he was going to clean it. So he put the car on the side of the river and he cleaned the car. Then he discovered that he couldn't get out of the river. It was stuck there. It was just going down in the gravel. So they went and they found a farmer who brought his bullock over, and they tied his bullock to the car. And it really seemed like the bullock was bigger than the car, I must say. But anyway, it was no trouble at all for the bullock to pull the car out of the river. Now we're going to skip over Taiwan and Hong Kong and the Philippines and Singapore, and we're going to go to Malaysia. In Malaysia, they had a very active Baha'i community, and I was a bit startled when I was arriving and I was in immigration, and I had to fill in the usual card that one had to fill in there before presenting it to the immigration authority. And somebody came up behind me and said, "Allahu Akbar." So they knew I was coming, and there was somebody who worked there who had recognized. I should say, by the way, that I had no idea what kind of person was going to be meeting me, what the situation was going to be. But I never had any trouble, and neither did they, recognizing a fellow Baha'i. There's just something, that you can recognize. So anyway, they said I should go up to Penang, where there was a very active youth community. It's in the north of Malaysia. So I got on the plane there and was flying up to Penang, and I was sitting next to somebody, and we got in a conversation, and he asked me why I was going to Penang. It's unusual. And I said, I didn't think fast enough. I said, I'm going to go visit friends. And he said, "Oh, you've been there before?" And I said, "Actually, no." So he thought I was a bit crazy, didn't pursue the matter. And then we arrived, we were getting off the plane, and here was a group of the Baha'is with a big banner saying, "Welcome, Greg," or something like that. It was like this huge welcoming party, and everybody was staring at me, who's this dignitary arriving in Penang? I think at that time it wasn't the place that would be visited very much. So they had a very active, they were very active with music. Everybody knew that. They were well known. And this is them singing there, these young people.
Shine the light on me, Baha'u'llah. Shine the light on me, Baha'u'llah. I am over here, Baha'u'llah. Glory, glory. Shine the light on us, Baha'u'llah. Shine the light on us, Baha'u'llah. We are over here, Baha'u'llah. Glory, glory.
So now we're going to go to Burma, which I think was the country that most captured my heart, I must say. Burma had been very closed for many years. The Baha'is hadn't been allowed to travel, and others hadn't been allowed to travel to Burma. I don't remember why I was able to get in, but I didn't have any trouble getting in. And at the airport, there was a young man behind the place where you put your luggage and open it, and they inspect to be sure that you're not bringing in anything illegal or taxable or whatever. He was the official there. And he looked at me sheepishly, and he said, "Can I see your guitar?" And I said, "Of course." He was customs official. He could open anything. So he took it out lovingly, and he said, "We have guitars here, but they're not as good as your Western guitars. They're not made with the right wood." And he was so happy to see a good guitar. Anyway, dear Burma had been really left behind, closed to the world, and what had been quite a colonial center for the British had just fallen into ruins. In Rangoon, I stayed in a YMCA, which was very basic, but I discovered I could go to the Strand Hotel, which the big old hotel was still functioning, and I could have breakfast there, and I'd be the only person, and there'd be white tablecloths and silver, and a waiter would come and serve me scrambled eggs, and it was a very good price. But otherwise, the place was really quite sad and run down, but the Baha'is were beautiful. This is the National Baha'i Center. One of the Baha'is there. A fellow who just recently become a Baha'i. And just what you see if you walked around in Rangoon at that time. It's very different now. They've opened to the world, but they also have a war going on. And then they took me to what is called Abdu'l-Baha's village, Daydano, which was one of the earliest settlements. Sayyid Mustafa Rumi went there in at the time of Baha'u'llah, began his travels in 1878, and he eventually settled in Daydano. And we'll get to that in a minute. But this was the road to get there. And I just loved the light, and I just loved the scenery, and the people were just marvelous. This was a teacher and his students in the town we went through on the way, a small town. And then a man in the larger town we went through on the way. And then this is the school children in Daydano, some of them. very curious about the visitor. Leaving the school. And I should tell you that years later, I was at the International Convention in Haifa on the bus with Stephen Birkeland sitting next to him. They have some days of mini pilgrimage before the convention. And some people behind me, we got in a conversation introducing themselves, and they were from Burma. And they asked me who I was, and I said, I'm Greg Dahl. And the man leaned forward and said, the Gregory Dahl? And I said, yes. And he said, I grew up with a songbook of your songs that you sang when you came to Burma. All these years later. I was a bit sad because the idea was to get people writing their own music and singing. I hope they had other music, not just the things I brought there. But anyway, obviously I'd made an impact, and they had actually made a songbook of the songs. So this was the shrine at that time, the tomb of Sayyid Mustafa Rumi, who was a very learned man, apparently, spoke many languages, but he was from Iraq, from Karbala, became a Bahá'í in India, and became on fire with the faith and traveled all across those countries and settled in Burma. And then there was an unsettled time in 1945, and he refused to leave there. People warned him, but they came and they killed a lot of the Baha'is, including him. He was martyred and buried in this place. But I'm sure left a lot of spiritual heritage. Was named a Hand of the Cross posthumously by The Guardian. These sort of people were growing rice, and they ate enormous quantities of rice for their meals. Of course, you had to. So we're going to skip over Bangladesh and Nepal and move on to India. My first stop was Calcutta. And this young woman here in the back, Shahnaz Tahiri, I recorded a song of hers, which I wanted to play for you. And I'm going to show a number of scenes while you're listening to the song, scenes of India, especially Rajasthan, which they sent me to, and the tremendous contrasts in India at that time. This song is in Urdu.
दुनिया में आया दीन बहाई ताज़ा हुई है सारी खुदाई करती है रूहें नगमा सराई क्या प्यारी प्यारी आवाज़ आई अल्लाह अभा आवाज़ आई आसमां से कह दो ये जाकर सारे जहां से मिलकर रहो तुम अमनो अमा से पढ़ते रहो तुम दिल की जुबां से अल्लाह अभा खुशियां मनाओ महफिल सजाओ सबको बुलाओ सबको सुनाओ
Now we're going to go, going to the West Coast. I needed to get to Bombay, and I was supposed to go from there up to Pune and to the Baha'i School, New Delhi, the New Era Baha'i School in Panchgani. And the only ticket they could get me to go from Delhi to Bombay was a third-class train. So they got me the ticket, they put me on the train, but I wasn't really told what to expect. I'm trying to remember, I think it was 36 hours on this train to get to Bombay at that time. It was a very slow train, so I saw a lot of India. And you sat on wooden benches, and then because it was overnight, you had to lie down. There was another one that opened up and people lay down to sleep. There was no cushion or no padding or anything, and there I was with my luggage. I actually was sitting next to a young man who was a physicist who'd studied in Moscow. It was quite interesting. But I was worried about my luggage. I needed to eat something, and I wanted to go to the dining car, but I didn't want to leave my luggage behind and have somebody get off on the many stops outside of Delhi and take my luggage with them. So I stayed until we left Delhi. And then I discovered that the train was not connected, so-called. You couldn't get from one car to the next. You could only do that at a station. You got down and walked down and got up into the dining car. So I had to wait till the train stopped somewhere, and I went to the dining car, and then I thought, oh no, the food is going to be very hot. I won't be able to eat it. What would be the thing most likely that I could eat? Probably eggs, scrambled eggs. So I ordered scrambled eggs, and they came, and I had a couple of bites, and I almost hit the ceiling. There was so much pepper in the scrambled eggs, so I ordered lots of orange soda to wash it down. Anyway, I went back to my seat, and then at night, I discovered that everybody was getting ready for bed, and they'd all bought bedding, but I hadn't. And I discovered lying down that I was about 2 inches too long to be able to lie flat on the space. I was big by Indian standards at that time. Now I'm too small. I can't find suits in my size. Everybody's gotten bigger. But yeah, that was memorable. But anyway, I mean, I survived the trip. It was all right. And I got to Bombay and went up to the New Era School, which you see pictures of here. And at that time, Dick Grover was there. I don't remember whether he was the director or was just there, but he was well known in the Eastern US as one of the Baha'is who knew many songs, and he would lead people in singing. And this is a recording of him singing. And just notice that about at least 3/4 of the students were young women, not guys, which was unusual in India, I think, at that time. So this is Dick Grover singing.
I can sing very well, and I can play very well, but I love thee well, I love thee well, I can speak very well, and I can teach very well, but I love thee well, I love thee well, beloved.
He went on to be at Greenacre for many years and was a popular feature there of being able to lead the singing. So my next stop after India was Afghanistan. Oh, sorry, this is the National Baha'i Center in Delhi, or was then. I'm sure they have something better now, but this was an important building because Gandhi had lived there. It was historically important. And this was their little garden. So the next country I went to was Afghanistan, and I learned later that the House of Justice had sent a cable saying I shouldn't go there because it might be dangerous, but I never received the cable. Very interesting. So I was there. Wasn't much I could do, but as I mentioned, I'd been asked to take pictures of Baha'i properties, so I did that. This is the caretaker of their Haziratul Quds and his Baha'i center and his family. But the scenery was like it was the time of Baha'u'llah. It was 19th century atmosphere, very unchanged from a long time before. And they put me up in a hotel near the airport. I had to put wood in the stove there to make hot water if I wanted a warm bath. That was the luxury available in Kabul. So this was the property that they had for temple property, which I took a picture of. And the young man who took me there, a group actually of them. Now, the next place I was due to go to was Haifa. I had been invited by the House of Justice to come there to help with the International Convention. 3 of us photographers. Oh, sorry, wait. No, I'm getting ahead of myself. Whoa, the next place was Iran. I'll come to Haifa. The next place was Iran, which was at that time still under the Shah. It was very different. And I was, in my mind, I was thinking of the time of Baha'u'llah, this kind of scene from Afghanistan, you know, donkeys and kuche and very rural. And somehow that was what I expected. And of course, I've been traveling across all these countries, India and Nepal and so on, which were similar kinds of countries. And I arrived in Tehran, and I hadn't realized that it was one of the 12 days of Nowruz, where Persians all dress up and eat a lot and are very high class. So I got off the plane and I saw everybody was wearing fancy suits and looking really sharp. And here I was, felt like I'd just come out of the deep countryside. But I'd written ahead, and I'd gotten letters back that I would be met by 2 different committees would send somebody there, the East-West Committee and the Youth Committee. So I went into the airport and looked around and didn't see anybody. So this was the first country, actually, that I had gone to where there was nobody to meet me, this big Baha'i community. So I thought, okay, I had a phone number, so I thought, okay, I'll call. But I went to the phone, but the phone required a coin. So I said, I'll change a little bit of money. I'll get some money. I'll get a coin. I got some coins, but none of the coins fit in the slot in the telephone. And I thought, what am I going to do? Baha'u'llah, help me. What can I do next? I'll find somebody who speaks English. So I looked around. There were 2 men standing there talking. I walked up to them and I said, excuse me, do you speak English? And this fellow looked at me and he said, are you Arthur Dahl's brother? And I said, yes. He was a Baha'i who'd been in Washington, D.C., who'd been to my brother's weekly firesides, and he recognized me by the resemblance. He was there for an entirely different purpose. But Baha'u'llah helped me. He called, took me into town, got me connected with the right people. So there were lots of activities there. This is some of the gentlemen who were all dressed up. I guess this was a gathering in Tehran. This was the Hasir al-Quds in Tehran at the time, the National Baha'i Center. Backside of it. They had a big meeting hall. Now the youth committee decided that they should record my songs. So they had some good equipment and they set it up and they recorded many of my songs. And I'm going to play you a little bit of one of them while showing you some of the Baha'i gatherings in a garden in the south of Tehran and in a private garden belonging to Reza Rehani's father in the north of Tehran while I play that song. The song is by Feridun Jalali, who is my dear friend in Raleigh, North Carolina. Oh, I turned the volume down. Wait a second here. This is kind of tricky. I have a player and then the...
We are building a new world, ever to remain, ever to remain, ever to remain. There will be no more hatred, never, never again, never, never again, never, never again. Building Baha'i communities in village.
Now, I'm going to play you a song by a young man named Sohail Safai, who was a member of a new music group called Bahá'í, and he's singing a song that he had written himself. He was imprisoned in October 1982 and was martyred on the 1st of May 1983. And he is singing this song. This is the room in which Baha'u'llah was born, in the house of his father in Tehran. There are 5 pictures from that house, and then 5 pictures from the house of the Bab in Shiraz, starting with the room in which the Bab declared his mission to Mullah Hussein. So this is Sohail Safai.
دست دین به دست هم قیام برم رقدم آسمون ز غم میناله ابرش همش سیاهه. اینه عاقبت دو دنیا، اینه خواسته خدا. آشرو ملدیان بر روح و بر ریحان، آشرو ملدیان بر روح و بر ریحان. دست بدین به دست هم، قیام برم رقدم، آسمون ز غم میناله.
This was my dear friend Manuchar Mohajeri, who is with us this evening, who I'd met he was studying at MIT, but he had to go back to do his military service teaching in the university in Iran, in Shiraz. And he's with Mr. Afnan, who I think was the caretaker. Manuchar, you can correct me, of the House of the Bab. And they took me to Persepolis to see some of the famous places in Iran. Now, finally, to Haifa. This is the hand of the cause, Mr. Faizi on the left. This is this is quite amazing to me. This is the Mount Carmel, looking down at what is now the seat of the House of Justice, the buildings on the Ark. You can't see it, but the Archives building was already built on the far left. But otherwise, it was all this area. Up here on the right is the road that goes around, and you enter, if you're a pilgrim, to go to the seat of the House of Justice and the ITC building and so on. It was just rough terrain at that time. So I was invited there along with two other photographers, Anthony Worley from Brazil and Ron Batchelor, whose wife is with us today. Three of us characters. It was great fun. We were there as photographers. We were using film provided by the audiovisual department of the House of Justice, which they kept, of course, but we were allowed to also take pictures with our own film. So these are my pictures. This was Ruhia Khanum addressing the delegates. We were very excited as photographers because during this third international convention, she removed the veil from over her head for the first time in a gathering of Iranians, basically, because it was expected she would always cover her hair. And we were all taking pictures of this historic moment. She loved to get away into villages, to get away from the Baha'i communities, to go into villages where she could be herself and could be informal, and of course, didn't have to put a veil over her head. So here she's addressing the delegates. These are some of the delegates. This was in a building that's just up the street from what is now the entrance to where you would go by car to the House of Justice, up that street. Ruhia Khanum was telling a story there about her travels in Africa, which I think she'd interrupted in order to be at the International Convention. And one of her stories was how she was telling the Africans that Baha'is believe in juju, but good juju, not bad juju, what we call voodoo in the West. In other words, there are spirits. We have in the Baha'i writings that there are spirits, people of the souls who have gone on. And she was saying that she and Violette were driving in their Jeep, their four-wheel drive vehicle, and it was having some problems and it was stuttering. And she said, I don't know what Violette was thinking, but I was asking whether there was anybody in the next world who was a good engineer, a good mechanic and could fix the car. And she'd say, push, and the car would leap forward. So after these meetings, we were staying way up in Ha Carmel, and it was a long way up, many stairs to get up there from down here or from the buildings further down. And I was tired, and so I thought, I'll try this, So I was going up the stairs, I say, push, and I felt myself leaping up a couple of stairs. Push it. There was so much spirit, because I don't know what it was exactly, but there was so much spirit in the air from all of these amazing souls. It was very tangible. I also remember very well, this picture was taken from a little room next to the stage where people would enter onto the stage. And I was in charge of the sound system there. So I was sitting there all the time, except when I was taking pictures. And there was one session where the hand of the cause, Bill Sears, was going to speak. So he was in my little room preparing before going onto the stage. He was a professional entertainer, some of you may know, a comedian. He had a TV program. It was very polished. And he would prepare his talks. So he was there with his notes and he was preparing what he was going to say. And then he stepped out behind the podium where I saw him. And I swear I could see the concourse on high descending on him. It was so tangible. He was just so inspired. It's amazing, the power of the atmosphere. It's really quite something. In the back of the room, this was a relatively small hall they were using, and in the back here there were some doors, and there was another space where the hands of the cause, the members of the House of Justice, and the councillors were sitting. And here they all are. They're all collected there. Amazing collection of important historical figures in our faith. Ali Naqshbandi there in the middle. This was Anthony Worley. What a character. He went with Rahil Khanum on the Green Light expedition up the Amazon. This was the three of us, Anthony Worley, Ron Batchelor, and myself, with David Walker, who also went, I think, with Rahil Khanum. He was one of the Kiva Films group, made a film of Bahá'í Youth Conference at that time. Married to Penny Walker, who was a member of the ITC for quite a few years. So that brings me to the end of my sharing of stories. I'm glad it was less than an hour. I wasn't sure how long it would take. I hope that you found it useful. Very interesting for me to look back over these 50 years and how much things have changed.
Wow, thank you so much, Greg. That was really an amazing show. I loved your voice and your calm enthusiasm, which is really very spiritual. And I wish you could tell more stories, at least another half hour.
Well, I did go to Africa after that, down the East Coast and up the West Coast, and I had many other stories, but that's enough for one evening.